everything is a matter of interpretation. It could easily be said that I am not a failure in that not much has happened since I started talking about the things I am known for talking about. But then, what can we expect to happen if others do not adopt my ideas or even understand them or make it a point of not understanding them, or if they did ever understand them, immediately forget them, as Scott does. And what does it all mean, all this? Pretending not to understand. And so the same questions are asked again and again, and the grievances are aired again and again. But there's never any progress because you have to start again and again if, after explaining the entire problem, the person you are explaining it to immediately forgets. And then, which is worse than somebody disagreeing, because at least if they disagree, there will be some kind of dialogue that could be seen as conflict, entertaining to the passerby. So today I noticed I noticed two things about Scott. He actually posted a comment on my stream with Megan, and then he mentioned it in passing, which I thought was good, and then he refused to comment on it, other than say that he wished I'd play by the rules, and men have ways of poking at other men who don't play by the rules. And I thought, what are the rules? Chit chat, not talking politics. Why would I want to chit chat about myself? I just can't do it. And I can't. Hi, Megan. Nice to see you. I don't know if you think we went a bit far. I don't think the men can keep up, but they're just not discussing it. I've noticed. But that's okay. It needs to sink in, and we have to be understanding, and it's quite a terrible realization. But actually, today's stream by PVK, it shows that there is some collective awareness of the problem, and I don't think women should be worried about men eventually getting around to blaming them. There's a kind of rotation of people to blame. We blame the Jews, and then we blame the immigrants, and then we blame the boomers, and then we blame the Muslims in particular, and then we go on the Pajites. And there is this rotation of blame. And yes, I suppose it can be a little alarming if you're being targeted, but we must be brave and have our answers ready about what we really need to discuss. So I've reduced it into one short question that I'm sure anybody can remember to ask at their next social gathering. Shut the window. And so we need to know what question to ask. It would be crazy not to be able. So I'm saying it's easy. So if you listen to the PVK stream, it'll, oh, we have to let everything collapse and build back better, and there will be a Mad Max world, but perhaps the women will come running to us. And I thought, well, if you can prevent the collapse without forgetting the lesson, how about it? And I'm saying it's not that hard if you ask the right question. I'll give up the link in case you want to join. And a question I think would be appropriate in our confused times is, what is the nature and purpose of religion? Just that. And everybody asked, everybody attempted to answer. And then, for Americans in particular, I was so disappointed recently when this American political activist who he's formerly communist, and he's trying to reach out to the dissident right. And I have been, in touch with him. And so he would be familiar with my ideas, except that, he doesn't want to discuss them, and he's promoting his own book. And I've said, well, come on my channel and, we can have a talk about your ideas, and maybe you can interview me about my ideas on your channel. And he's just point blank refusing and saying he doesn't know what I'm talking about, harping on about George Washington, who was the one who said we must with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. And one of the things that really annoys me about Scott is that I did have a conversation about George Washington with him, and I'm pretty sure he did go and read the speech, and I'm pretty sure he did understand all the points I was making, or the most important points. And now he's pretending to not know what I'm on about. Megan asks, I think you're speaking to an important point of how we tend to have to recap our stances, grievances over and over. Is it because we don't believe what we say or aren't actually listening? I think it's because you don't want to do the thing that you would know you have to do once you acknowledge the truth of what I'm saying, and you don't even want to discuss whether I'm right or wrong because you don't want to be, you don't want to be doing it. So it's just easier to pretend not to understand, right? I'm familiar with all these steps one takes. I mean, it's easier to pretend not to understand than understand and argue about it and then lose the argument, right? I just don't think I can go any higher for, when talking to Americans, but talk about, George Washington, because, obviously you're not going to listen to me. I'm not even American. But if I refer to a founding father, I mean, well, of course, I've met so many Americans who say, well, I'm not reading it. It's too long. The language is too archaic. And what good would it do anyway? And, he's just a dead white male. And all these terrible things. So, nothing matters after you are dead. Well, it's ridiculous and outrageous. But yes, I get it about not wanting to, quote, go there, unquote. And I think the problem is, I don't want it to be me. I don't want to be the one to say those things and for all those rocks to be thrown at me, and I just don't think I can take it, and maybe worse will happen than people throwing rocks at me. And yes, I get it all, but I think that there's a kind of uh, temperature building up, really, when things get worse, and then people will be more and more prepared to ask more searching questions and answer them honestly. And it's nothing to do with me. It's just me reading George Washington's speech, about what the country should do, and all the warnings he made about political parties, and I guess over expansionism. Because his whole idea was, I think, America's big enough to be self-sufficient. We should just be self-sufficient and not be participating and interfering in the affairs of other countries, because, well, look what happened. Look what happened to Britain. Look what happened to Spain. Who the Spanish were really into sponsoring wars against their imperial rivals. The Spanish Armada being the most memorable example. And I think Scott understands what I'm saying about there being only one Abrahamic God. And I think he also understands what I mean when I say it's gone out of my head. Religion? Oh, yes. Organized religion in particular. So it would be really sad if the people who are the beneficiaries, the biggest beneficiary of organized religion, gave it up altogether and became, say, pagan or Hindu or Buddhist. It would be a shame. So it's like, well, it's kind of like, you don't know where you came from, you don't know how your ancestors became successful, and you're just throwing out family heirlooms because you don't think they're useful or valuable. And a lot of these things I'm talking about are basically ideas, and particularly ideas supporting monogamy, because monogamy, I think, gives you the most stable society. And I know Europe has been through lots of wars, and so has America, but it creates a kind of culture where children are less messed up because they don't have, step parents, all over the place, and, step siblings to be competing with, of, all age ranges. So I think monogamy has something to be said for it. And I know BVK also said stuff about, these Muslims are always, honor killing each other. And I did look up the statistics of honor killing in Holland. I'm not going to revisit them because, I don't have them anymore because I looked it up online. But basically, yes, there was a rise in a certain part, in a certain decade. And then then everything calmed down. So even if those Muslims were honor killing their children, they're not doing it now because probably they've assimilated and been liberalized, as have Jews and Christians and anybody coming to the West. They would have been liberalized and partaken of the culture of casual sex, and will increasingly think like Westerners and not want to marry and not have children. And, and I'm saying, for quite a few of us, well, it might be too late. It's only too late for me to be getting married and having lots of children. But I keep saying that even if you're a confirmed bachelor and nobody wants to marry you, and even if you're gay, and even if you're a never married parent, you could still say that, whatever my marital status and the legitimacy of my children, of course, can I cannot deny that it would be better for the next generation if they were all, preferably, ideally, reared in stable homes by their biological married parents in a loving relationship. So I know, not everybody will be able to fulfill these conditions, but just get that marriage certificate, get that marriage license before having children, and then eventually the women will get the idea that maybe it's not such a good idea to enjoy a culture of casual sex when you're in your prime, in your 20s, when, obviously you're going to get more offers than you're prepared to accept. But then, if your body count is too high, then it will be difficult in terms of marriage opportunities. And men too, at some point, we have to accept that in terms of the numbers, and I'm sure Ups will be able to explain this because he understands numbers. Damn, I've forgotten what I was going to say again about the numbers. It'll come back, I hope. I was talking about women in their prime, in their 20s, and there must be some kind of oh yes, I mean the thing is, men might want to have sex with lots of women, their not not their wife, and expect a virgin bride. I mean, how unrealistic some people can be, but in a close community, of course, this is impossible. If you have sex with all the women in your community, well, it wouldn't be realistic of you to expect a virgin bride, and the numbers just don't work out. And all this sort of silly, scary stuff about Muslims having four. I mean, of course, most Muslims, will not have the resources or the energy to have four wives. It's only the ultra rich ones who did. And actually, if you read the Quran, it does say monogamy is the ideal, but sometimes necessary in after a ruinous war. And when you make men have more than one wife after a ruinous war, it won't be the sort of fun thing that people fondly imagine it to be. It will be obviously a terrible burden, and you have to manage all your wives and their children. And so, but it would make sense, if after two ruinous world wars, the British decided to. I mean, if they were already Muslim, obviously, and then they would just have had, lots of children with their, more than one wife, and replenished the labour force without having to get people from their colonies. And this applies to France. So, unfortunately, if you start wars, things are going to change whether you want them to or not, because wars are very dislocating, and for the losing party, even for the winning party, because the whole idea in the olden days is you want booty and you want to bring home slaves, and if you bring back too many of them, it's going to have an effect on your economy, as the Romans discovered, because after after the Romans had conquered most of the known world, Rome was flooded with slaves, and the wealthy of Rome thought that they preferred to deal with slave labor rather than find honest, free labor. And so the the proletariat of Rome were forced. Well, they were entertained with bread and circuses to see that they didn't riot, and and in the meantime, the Romans, the wealthy ones, continued with using slaves until the Roman Empire lost their indigenous working class. And obviously, this had an effect on the supply of labor and the men prepared to join the Roman army. And then they found they had no choice but to recruit mercenaries. And once you recruit mercenaries, it really is the interview, because you can't, because just by the fact that you are recruiting mercenaries, you're telling the world that you're not prepared to do your own fighting, because the men in your country are not fit for the purpose of fighting, or just refuse. So there must be something wrong, and the mercenaries will take advantage of the fact that you're not prepared to do your own fighting, and string things out and drain your treasury. So I think these points are quite easily understood, and I don't think even particularly controversial. I do hope AI will confirm the truth of what I said. But I think the problem is not, my version of history, or the preferred version of history. I think it's the instinct in men to say, well, who is she anyway? We can just ignore her. She hasn't even got that many subscribers, and everybody hates her, and you know. But I think the message is out, really, and that's why today I saw on X quite a few people in a space talking about patriarchy, which is kind of a word that, okay, obviously I didn't make it up, but I use it a lot. So I've colonized it, and I see other people using it. So it seems to be a start. But I'm saying, really, the problem is psychological, and obviously it's dangerous, because if it's going to take 10 years for the penny to drop in Scott's head, then nothing will be done for 10 more years, right? And the thing is, I know I said it to him. I knew when I was talking to him, and you will find my conversation with him on my channel, the other channel, the primary channel. You'll be able to tell that he did understand what I was saying. It's just that he chose to forget. So I guess it will happen to other men because of the enormity of the undertaking. But I'm saying it's not that enormous. I am not asking you to run for president. You just have to keep asking. Okay, all you need to do is have that national conversation, asking each other the nature and purpose of religion, and what George Washington might have meant when he said we must, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. And he said other things too about, a one-party state. Well, I guess he must have meant a one-party state, because he issued such dire warnings about having political parties. And so when I was talking to Caleb Morpin, who's he's a former communist, And he's got this new idea called innovationism. And I looked up innovationism, and AI told me, well, AI did not come up with his idea, and there were other, people talking about innovationism, and their names were not his. But with secular Quranism, I think only I am associated with it. And if somebody wants to pretend that they thought of it, well, that would be interesting. I actually have noticed a few names, Muslim names, and then when I asked AI, are you sure? Isn't it somebody called Claire Call? And they immediately correct themselves. But for some reason, AI is now saying, I can't even remember their names. Oh yes, the liberal progressive Muslim Turk or Epsil or something like that. But I've tried talking to him and he doesn't want to talk to me. So obviously he doesn't mean my interpretation of the Quran. I suppose some women might be a little worried, but I don't think they need to be worried. Look, I actually say it can be done through a referendum, a national referendum. And I'm saying you can actually shame people into supporting it. Right? You can go to gay people and say, look, we don't expect you, to assume the burdens of matrimony and, pay for children and, because you don't have the, natural inclination. But you could at least agree that it would be better if, for the next generation, if marriage were more supported by the government. You could say that. You could say that to old people who are no longer marriageable, even if they're single. And you could say that to young people who are not even marriageable. I'm sure they, the more intelligent ones of them would be able to agree that it would be better to have mum and dad living together looking after you than just mum and her unsuitable boyfriend. And I think divorced parents could also be persuaded to agree. And well, anyone who doesn't agree, okay, let's imagine what a feminist might say. She would say, well, I don't want to. And we're going to say, well, you don't have to marry. Nobody's forcing you to marry. In fact, it would be a very bad idea to physically force. I mean, it doesn't work anyway, and it's also dysgenic, and it cannot. Well, it won't be a happy marriage. So you do have to let the woman choose. And if you want to bring social pressure on men and women to marry, well, that's the most that can be done. But I think eventually people will conform and be sensible again. Yes, I know a lot of people talk about concubines. I mean, I know they actually existed in China, but it just means that they are lower in status than the wife, and there can only be one wife. But there can be concubines. But obviously, according to the Quran, that's not being fair to them because the others are lower in status. And I've actually read a book on polygamy in Islam, and it really is quite burdensome because they do take quite seriously this idea of being fair to them. So when you want to go on a holiday and you don't want to take all four of them, how are you going to choose? Do you just say? Do you just pick the one you want to come, and then what about the next time? You'll have to rotate. You can't just take one on holiday and leave all the others behind, and then you have to bring home, maybe holiday presents and stuff, and they have to be of equal value, and it's like a really tedious business meeting, and but anyway, if you're going to take it, oh yes. Now I remember this man. He's this Floridian in Florida. Well, he's a Catholic. Okay, he is culturally Catholic, and he's this Floridian who told me about this Muslim husband who had more than one wife, and I think he had to do some work for this guy, and and he was saying how agitated this Muslim husband was about ensuring that in the different houses for his wives that the um, furniture and the fittings were exactly the same value. And this is, an Islamophobe. So I thought that was quite interesting. Now, I know a lot of people find this rule-based system of Islam annoying, but I think actually it can be fun, just speculating on how they might be complied with, or how they might be avoided, and how they might be enforced. But that's because I'm legally trained. But I think even those who aren't legally trained can get their minds around it, and I'm sure it will, make you smarter. I'm sure of it. Megan says, to take on a stance in the presence of another means you are called to take responsibility for that stance. And I don't know many people willing to actually take, but on that responsibility. But what responsibility do you mean? I mean, you just ask a question, and people might answer, and you just nod along or ask another question. I just don't see that as being particularly difficult. I mean, you have a dinner party, you're the hostess, you can ask that question, and then it becomes, the general topic of the evening. After you finish with the niceties, I just don't think it. Oh, you're a guest. You can always somehow insert that question. So I don't know what this responsibility, because I think eventually somebody will want to do something about it. But obviously, it's easier for the person who wants to do something about it to think, well, it's a thing, people are talking about it, so I would feel safe talking about it and not feel weird by raising the subject, and it will gain a momentum that I believe will be unignorable. But obviously, as individuals, we have to do our bit and ask the people in our lives that we see from time to time, whose social functions we might attend, and get the ball rolling that way. And it's summertime and people are more sociable. But I think a good way of doing it, if you like cooking and you like having people over, is to, invite a few trusted friends to your dinner party. And also because you're the host or hostess, people will, be more respectful, and they're not going to argue with you too much. Because at the back of their minds, they will acknowledge you to be higher status than they are because you are the host. And and then I like to think that, okay, maybe one of the guests, or a few of them don't quite agree, and they might think, well, there were a few things I wanted to say, but I didn't quite dare to say because I didn't want to start a fight at so and so's dinner party. But I'll have a dinner party, and then I will dictate the tone of how of the evening by talking about it in my way. I mean, all sorts of things could, in theory, happen, and I think it would be fun. I mean, what responsibility is there anyway? You just ask the question and listen to the answers and facilitate the discussion in real life. If you can't do it in real life, you can do it online. What's a big deal? Surely the problem is the lack of a religion that the people claiming to be a member of it will properly examine. So I know that, just observing the TLC, you don't really want to talk about controversial stuff like the Trinity. And in fact, we already know that, the last thing PVK wants to discuss is the Trinity. And I suspect that PVK started the estuary protocols to make sure that the Trinity is always off the menu. Okay, so I've spoken for 36 minutes, and I do thank you, for coming, and I think you take my point, don't you? It's really not that hard, and the thing is, I'm not asking anybody to get on their soapbox. There is no need. You just ask a question, and the person will want to answer. I think they will want to answer the question, and then you ask your further question, you agree or disagree, and you have a conversation. And fundamentally, it just takes a will to do it. After you decide, well, maybe it's not that difficult. I wouldn't mind giving it a go, even though I'm only one person. Particularly if I'm not required to, stand on my soapbox and make some speech, during which, rotten eggs and vegetables will be thrown at me. But yes, your responsibility can be discharged by just asking the question. So that's all I have to say. I'll keep it short and sweet, and thank you all for coming.